top 100 player in the nation, offensive tackle Josh Conerly Jr. is set to release his top 12 sometime around the end of spring. However, we have a decent understanding of a few teams that seem to be pulling ahead, and this is going to be an awesome battle that will come down to teams such as Oklahoma, Alabama, and the Texas Longhorns, and we need to get into it. But before we do, as always, y'all know the drill. I want to hear from y'all. So hop down to the comments and let me know where you think Josh Conerly Jr. ultimately plays his college football. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell notification because I do constant college football content. Player reviews, film analysis, talk style videos like this, and I'm on my push to 5,000 subscribers in my first year, and I'd love to have you along for the journey. And if you did enjoy this video, be sure to like and comment down below because those interactions go a long ways for helping content creators like myself get picked up by the YouTube algorithm. But with all of that being said and out the way, let's talk about the number 55 overall player in the nation. And Josh Conerly Jr. plays offensive tackle. He stands 6'5", 275 pounds, and it's important to note that he is a dual sport athlete. Right now he plays basketball and he's a very good basketball player. And when you watch his football highlights, a few things stand out. First, incredible tenacity at the point of attack. More often than not, he's pancaking dudes, and he's doing it a lot within his first move. I mean, he's just so strong and explosive that he is just waylaying dudes. The other thing that stands out to me is how quick he is, how athletic he is, especially with his clips with him playing on the defensive line. My goodness gracious. This is a guy who I actually think could probably be just as highly rated if he was a defensive tackle as an offensive tackle. So take that as you will. He will play offensive line in college, but I always love guys that have a deep understanding of the defensive line. I think the most awesome thing about Conerly, aside from his awesome tenacity at the point of attack and his great footwork, is his understanding and the way he does hand fighting. There are some clips of him hand fighting where guys who are looking to be legitimate pass rushers are coming at him trying to do a jab technique, and he's catching their hands in midair and just throwing them to the ground. Really impressive stuff. Really hyper impressive stuff. And I think one of the things that Conerly offers in this class that you have to be just super excited for is if you are an institution that ends up getting his commitment and you are loaded at the tackle position, this is a guy who I think you could transition into a very high round draft pick at guard. When you look at how quick his feet are, how athletic he is, if you're in a system that pulls guards a lot, my goodness gracious, he's a guy who can start anywhere along the offensive line. I don't know if he has any time at center, but he has a 3.8 GPA, so he's a very smart guy. And that's really what I really like about Conerly. He's got the power, the aggressiveness, and the tenacity to play tackle, but his footwork and his ability allows him to play everywhere on the offensive line, which gives a ton of flexibility to institutions when they're looking at him because they know that he could legitimately start for them at tackle and guard. Now, I do believe he probably will be a guard in college just because I think he's almost too good not to have it guard, where you can do so many different things with him. But let's talk about some of the programs that are currently surging ahead for Josh Conerly. And of course, the hometown team of Washington needs to be discussed. Washington is a team that holds a lot of stake in this right now, and it's important to note that he is very close with Scott Huff. Aside from being very close with Scott Huff, Nathaniel Capo, who is currently on campus as an offensive lineman for Washington, is someone he considers to be a mentor to him. So that's incredibly interesting. They're going to be a real contender in this, especially since he's considered and talked about staying home and building something for the Huskies. However, that doesn't mean that it's a sure thing. And if you are a Pac-12 fan, you do have to feel good because the next two teams we're going to talk about also Pac-12, USC and Oregon. Now, he's always liked USC. He's talked about how he's had a long affinity for USC, and if you grow up in Pac-12 territory, I guess it's kind of hard not to. That's just a storied program and a really cool one. I think most college football fans find it within themselves to have a little bit of a soft spot for USC, whether they like to admit it or not, unless you've had storied rivalries, in which case it's a rivalry and we understand that. But you get my point. USC seems to be that team that nobody just hates, but they are a team right now that is firmly in the running for a Josh Conerly, and he points to their recent success in the draft, putting out a first rounder last year and looking to back that up with maybe another first rounder this year, and that's something that's very important to Conerly. He's talked about it, he's talked about wanting to be developed, and like I said at the beginning of this video when talking about just the depth of his skill set, when you are a guy with that depth of a skill set, you absolutely want to go somewhere where they can develop you, because he could be developed in multiple different positions, and I think that his stock is just going to carry over through college into the NFL draft, and USC he sees as a team that could get him there. Oregon is somewhere that he has actually visited. He visited Oregon in 2019, and what Oregon has going for them right now, aside from being hot on the recruiting trail, which USC is as well, is Oregon is coached by Mario Cristobal, who is at heart an offensive line coach, and Cristobal has interjected himself into the recruiting process of Conerly personally. That's going to be one to watch. But now the three schools that I think all have something very unique and very interesting tidbits. First and foremost, we'll go with Oklahoma. And out of every coordinator, out of every coach that Conerly has poured over, there are two coaches in particular that I think he's really talked highly about. First and foremost, Bill Bedenbaugh. Now, I didn't get that name wrong the second time. Y'all got after me the first time, and deservedly so, but I'm going to learn. Bedenbaugh is a guy who Conerly is very high on. Oklahoma has a lineage of doing great things with the offensive line, and Oklahoma is surging in the recruiting rankings. We've talked about some of the guys they could be picking up, not only along the defensive side of the ball, but also along the offensive side of the ball, maybe stacking 2 5-star running backs this year. And if that's the case, why wouldn't you want to go block for that, especially when you have an institution with the lineage of Oklahoma at the offensive line position? Aside from having Bill Bedenbaugh, similarly to Washington, OU also has an in a former AAU competitor of Josh Conerly Jr. and actually a friend, Nathan Rawlings Kaibonge. And that right there is going to be something that OU tests. He's a member of the class. They're going to be trying to get Kaibonge to recruit Conerly Jr. so that they can go together. Kaibonge being from Portland, very close in proximity to Conerly Jr. But that because they play AAU both against each other, with each other, is going to be something that OU looks to exploit, especially when he's so high on Bill Bedenbaugh. OU is very firmly in this process, and they actually look to be one of the favorites. Another team that actually has some very interesting things working in their favors is the Texas Longhorns. Now, the Texas Longhorns have a few interesting things here. Aside from Brandon Harris reaching out and being very well received on the recruiting trail, the Longhorns actually have 3 things working for them in this current situation. First, Steve Sarkisian. Offensive guy, a lot of offensive talent, wants to go play for him, but not only that, he has personal ties to the Washington area from his time coaching there, and because of that, he's very familiar with how to recruit in that area. The second big thing is Kyle Flood. Kyle Flood, coming with Steve Sarkisian to Texas from Alabama, is a continuation of recruitment when it comes to Josh Conerly Jr. Kyle Flood was the guy at Alabama who was pursuing Josh Conerly Jr., so Conerly Jr. gets a continuation of a relationship with someone he knew, albeit at a different program. But we've talked about this before, especially with Jay Valai as it pertains to Denver Harris and Evan Stewart for Alabama, how that's important that they get a continuation of a process not only from a recruiter, but from an institution. And that's going to sit very well for Texas because Texas doesn't have to start over with a new face. And third and finally, it just kind of adds in, Coach K from Washington was also involved in Conerly's recruitment when he was at Washington, so that's another factor of continuation for the Texas Longhorns. But lastly, the team we need to watch out for is the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, perhaps maybe aside from a Bedenbaugh, maybe no other offensive line coach has made so many waves in such a short amount of time as Doug Marrone in college. Even though Doug Marrone hasn't been at it very long, he is being incredibly well received on the recruiting trail, and a lot of guys who hadn't had Alabama in their top before when Doug Marrone wasn't on staff currently have Alabama in their top X amount of schools, and all cite Doug Marrone's knowledge about developing offensive line, knowing what it takes to get them to the NFL readiness, and then 3, knowing how to coach an NFL offensive line. Offensive linemen are hugely high on Doug Marrone, and because that Josh Conerly Jr. has talked about him being so high on Doug Marrone, I think that gives Alabama a very good chance. The second reason that if you're an Alabama Crimson Tide fan, you have to like where you are for the number 55 player in the nation is Nick Saban. And I know we say this a lot, but this is a time where Nick Saban himself has gotten personally involved in the recruitment of a player. Not abnormal, but it is a little strange to see it at this time, right? It's still so far because we don't expect Connerly Jr. to make a decision until the All-American game, which is a ways away, and Nick Saban has already interjected himself into the recruitment of Josh Conerly Jr. Now, why is this important? Because history bodes well for the Tide when Nick Saban interjects himself into the recruiting process of a player. Nick Saban's a phenomenal recruiter, and, Connerly talked about USC's lineage of getting tackles and linemen to the NFL, and there might not be a better lineage in his list that we currently just talked about than Alabama, because my goodness me, they're about to send another guy to the NFL along with guys that they sent the previous X amount of years. It's just getting incredible, the offensive linemen they're sending to the NFL, and not only that, they just signed the greatest offensive line class of all time and have a lot of guys on this roster that are very highly touted. Remember, there's a chance that on Alabama's starting offensive line this year, we could see 3 players on that offensive line who were all ranked inside the top 10 players in the nation when they came out of high school. That's just crazy. But I want to hear what y'all are thinking, because Josh Conerly Jr., this is going to be one of the most entertaining processes to follow in all of high school recruiting because of what I said. His ability to play anywhere on the offensive line allows for maximum fluidity, and that's going to be something that is very hard to deny. But I can't wait to hear what y'all are thinking. Hop down in the comments and let me know. That's it. See ya.